Gender is a scam, there are no rules, do whatever you want, but I'm still a girl. Hey everybody, welcome back. I've got another vlog for you about being transgender. If you don't know, I post one of those every Sunday around noon, so please subscribe if you're interested in that kind of content, and leave a like and comment if you enjoyed this video. So today I'd like to talk about non-binary identity and whether or not I identify as non-binary and what it even means to be non-binary. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think that as we as a culture have progressed and understood gender identity better and more thoroughly, especially among the young generation, a lot of things have kind of broken down, and I feel like one of the essential parts of being trans is kind of realizing that gender is a social construct. It's just fake. It's this weird made up abstract thing, this set of rules that exist that you don't even really have to follow, but everybody does. And so you can kind of just realize that that's fake and then do whatever you want. But then once you realize you have all these options, it's kind of like choice paralysis. I feel like it's, if you can do anything you want, then what will you do if the whole world is available to you? And that's how I felt when I started transitioning. And I eventually decided that I was going to go for a relatively binary transition, but that wasn't what I was thinking the whole time, and I definitely considered identifying more as non-binary and giving more of an androgynous presentation. But we'll get into that in a moment. So that's where we're going, but I want to start with some groundwork of, first of all, what does non-binary mean? Non-binary identity is simply a gender identity which does not cleanly lie in either man or woman in the gender binary. You don't identify exclusively as a man or a woman. You're outside of the binary. You're non-binary. So what does, in practice, what does that look like? What can we say about non-binary people generally? Well, that's the thing, is we can't really say much about non-binary people as a group because being non-binary is an umbrella term, first of all, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it includes a lot of different, more specific identities. But we can take a look at some trends, and this is seriously a very high level abstract trend analysis thing, and I'm only even really looking at these trends to break them down. So if you're a non-binary person watching, just know that I'm not trying to put all non-binary people into a box by saying this stuff. I'm building it up to tear it down in a moment. But basically, when you think of a non-binary person, you might think of somebody who's really androgynous or has a mixture of secondary sex characteristics like a beard and breasts, or somebody who's just super androgynous and might be mistaken for a man or a woman. And generally, you think of gender nonconformity. In my opinion, that is kind of the cultural idea, the collective idea that we have of people who are non-binary, and that would maybe associated with people who use they/them pronouns exclusively, or maybe neopronouns. So that's the idea of what we have that a non-binary person is likely to look like. And there certainly are a lot of non-binary people who look like that, who are really explicitly gender non-conforming. They have a mixture of masculine and feminine traits, or maybe they're really androgynous. They use they/them pronouns or neopronouns. There are lots and lots of non-binary people that have that kind of gender presentation. And to be clear, what we're talking about right now is gender presentation rather than gender identity. But the thing is, non-binary people can look like anything and present themselves in any way. I mean, I guess I'm kind of androgynous, but I have a generally more femme look. I could be non-binary, and you wouldn't know from just looking at me. You could see any person that looks ostensibly like a cis man or a woman, and just look at them and assume that they're a cis man or a woman. But actually, they are non-binary if they identify as non-binary. So being non-binary doesn't deterministically mean anything about your gender presentation. You can use any pronouns, you can have any set of secondary sex characteristics, you can dress in any way, you can have any kind of voice, any kind of clothing style. It doesn't deterministically mean anything about your appearance or presentation. So then, again, we come back to, well, what does it really mean to be non-binary then? This is basically how all gender identity works, but the only good way to determine if somebody is non-binary or trans or any gender or the other is self-ID. That's basically the only way that you're going to be able to understand people's gender identities without gatekeeping them. So if somebody self-identifies as non-binary, then they are non-binary. That's basically how it works. If somebody feels like their personal sense of gender identity doesn't exclusively exist in the binary of man or woman, then they are non-binary. But, you see, I've just given you two different definitions. I've said, if somebody identifies as non-binary, then they are non-binary. But then I said what non-binary is, it's somebody who doesn't exclusively identify as a man or a woman, and that's non-binary. But those two things aren't necessarily the same. To say that you're non-binary means that you're non-binary is kind of like a semantic loop, and then for somebody to not exclusively exist within the space of, within the gender of a man or a woman, for that to be non-binary, as we'll see in a moment, that has some problems of its own, including, like I said, you really want to rely on self-ID for to not gatekeep, but it has some intrinsic problems of its own that we'll get to in a moment as well. And I'm going to use myself as an example here. So for me, I identify as a woman. I don't claim the label of non-binary. I consider my gender to be female, that I am a woman, that I am a young woman, that I'm a girl, what have you. I do not claim to be non-binary. But I did consider being non-binary. I did consider claiming the label and the identity of being non-binary early in my transition, but I didn't. And I'll get to that in a moment. But why did I ultimately choose to identify myself as a woman? Well, basically, at the risk of sounding cold and calculating, social capital, honestly. I like that I have the social capital, the acceptance by society when I call myself a woman, and when I use she her pronouns exclusively, and when I don't dress an exclusively archetypically feminine woman way all the time. I'll wear androgynous clothes, this is a t-shirt, anybody can wear a t-shirt. But I like that I can pass, and I can be not only pass as a woman, but I can be cis passing, and then people don't even, if I put the effort into passing, then people don't even know that I'm trans, and they don't even know that I'm queer necessarily if I don't want them to. Now, a lot of the times I do want to make it known that I'm trans and that I'm queer, but for safety and for, again, social capital and power, essentially, in an abstract way, it empowers me within society to not be seen as queer and trans and non-binary, which I'm not presenting as, but I considered. It's empowering to me to have that social role to fit into, and to not be necessarily outed as queer if I don't need to be. That's the thing. There's essentially not really any passing for non-binary people. Most people in the world are either going to see you as a man or a woman, and there are some queer people and some young people that may guess that you're non-binary, or people generally maybe will be uncertain as to what gender you are, but there aren't a lot of people in the world who, before you tell them you're non-binary, will just see you as non-binary and not treat you as one social role or the other, one gender or the other. Most people in the world are going to ascribe some set of gendered characteristics to you just because that's like the way they've been socially programmed, and that's what they do for everyone for their whole life. That's just normal to them. And if somebody's going to do that to me, I want to be gendered female. I want people to think that I'm a woman. I don't want people to think that I'm a man. And maybe sometimes I will like being like a little bit androgynous and people will be unsure. But ultimately, I want people to understand that if they are going to treat me as a man or a woman, they need to treat me as a woman, not a man. So I basically just, I like that social role better than the social role of a man, or like the hyper ambiguous like liminal space of going for like an explicitly non-binary, androgynous, or gender non-conforming presentation. Additionally, I like the sense of completeness that I feel in my own identity by having this like lens to see myself with as a woman. Now, I've gone back and forth on this a lot because, as I'll get to in a moment, like, being a woman doesn't like completely essentially describe me, like who I am and every part of me. And in fact, that's like a really big reason why I considered that I might identify as non-binary. But the thing that I realized was that even if I identify as a woman, that doesn't need to be every aspect of my identity, and it doesn't need to like intrinsically define me to who I am. Like, in some ways, I'm not a woman. I'm just me. But I like having this one social category among many social categories that I may fall into. I like having this one social category which is like comforting for me. Like, being trans feminine, I had to learn that I really enjoyed and really felt comfortable being feminine and like expressing myself in a feminine way, and having other people perceive me as feminine and perceiving myself as feminine. And I had to learn that I really, really, like, that made me really comfortable and really confident in who I am when I like viewed myself in that way. And for better or worse, femininity is associated with women. It's not like this abstract thing that everybody in the whole world knows that like masculinity and femininity are just like these social constructs that exist on a spectrum that are like separate from your like gender identity. Even as a trans person, I don't have that fully internalized. Like, I associate femininity with women, and when I think of myself as a woman, I feel more feminine. And that is maybe due to internalized transphobia, or like maybe I just haven't like cracked open like the gender wokeness like mystery of the universe fully in my head yet. But for better or worse, I feel more secure in myself and more affirmed in my femininity and more comfortable in my femininity when I think of myself in terms of like me just being a normal girl. And I know how problematic that is, but just bear with me for a moment. Okay, so I also considered being non-binary, like I said. So I'll go over like some of the reasons why I think that I could be non-binary, or why I did think that I could be non-binary. Primarily, gender is fake, gender is a scam, like gender is a lie, and a like weird fake set of rules that they tell you you have to follow, but you don't actually have to follow any of them, and it's all fake, and we live in a society, man. I mean, all of that is true. Like, what does it even mean to be a man or a woman? Like, those things are just made up. Like, you're just you. I'm just me. I can do whatever I want. Like, I'm not a woman. I'm just me. I can just do whatever I want. Again, like we said, or like I said earlier, I ultimately decided that being a woman was more comforting to me, but it's still true that all of this stuff is just like made up, and I don't really have to do anything, and being a woman doesn't really necessarily mean anything for me, because I can still do whatever I want. I just won't claim the identity of non-binary, because I would rather claim the identity of being a woman and reaping the social benefits of that. I know that sounds cold and calculating, but that's really what it comes down to for me. I don't really have a strong desire to like give off like a extremely androgynous or gender non-conforming presentation all the time, Sometimes I might lean into that a little bit for like some fun or some like experimental presentation, but I'm generally content expressing myself in a way that most people would like recognize to be a woman, even if perhaps a somewhat gender nonconforming woman at times. So I'm not going to claim the identity of non-binary because it's not useful to me. And I know that's so utilitarian, but that's just what it comes down to. It's just not that useful to me. But then I think, so if I'm not claiming to be non-binary, then I'm not non-binary because I'm not self-identifying as non-binary. If somebody says they're non-binary, then they're non-binary. And if somebody doesn't say they're non-binary, then they're not non-binary by that definition that we had earlier. But with the other definition that we were working on, somebody's personal sense of gender identity doesn't fall completely within the category of like exclusively of man or woman, then that's non-binary. Well, then I do fit that definition because like I don't feel like every facet of my being falls completely within like this like weird like arbitrary social category that we've made of man or woman. But then again, I feel like that's true of everybody. Like nobody exists like only within like this archetypical social category of man or woman. And so then you could say everybody is non-binary, and that's not very helpful either. So generally, like I'm going to come back to the self-identification thing because that's really the only like non-gatekeepy definition that you can use. It's like somebody is non-binary if they identify as non-binary, and I just don't choose to identify that way, so I don't consider myself non-binary. But that is just a matter of language, because for all intents and purposes, I'm no different from like another like trans feminine person who made the choice to like have like a relatively binary transition, but also claim the label of non-binary, which there are lots of trans feminine people who do that. I just didn't choose to. So it really just comes down to self-ID. But in the case of like trans people specifically, and trans femme people, because that's the experience I know, it's like, in another sense, I'm kind of non-binary, like, no matter what. Like, sure, there are like binary trans women that exist that like go all in like having like a totally binary like medical transition and like try to become as close to a cis woman as possible. But I'm not really that, like, I'm not going to, like, I'm not trying to copy a cis woman's body exactly, but even if I was, like, even those women, I mean, sure, if they want to identify as binary trans women, then that's totally fine and valid, but the thing is, this just, like, shows, like, the flaws in our language of, like, there's this great video by Lily Alexander called Do Binary Trans Women Even Exist? Which is what I'm getting at here is, like, is there such a thing as a binary trans person? Like, we are already breaking down the gender binary intrinsically by transitioning from one to the other and going from one side to the other. And no matter, like, how much we do to transition, we're always going to be trans. Like, you can't become not trans. And being trans means that you have, like, masculine and feminine characteristics. I mean, just like everybody does, but it's like a certain intersection of masculinity and femininity that trans people have, and it really puts you outside of the gender binary in the way that most people think of the gender binary. Maybe not the way that like a lot of trans people think of the gender binary, but the way like culturally, collectively we think of the gender binary, it puts you outside of that. But then again, nobody really lies strictly within like the archetypical categories of man or woman, so nobody really lies inside one of those categories exclusively. And so like you could say everybody is non-binary, you could say that all trans people are non-binary. It's really just good to say people who say they're non-binary are non-binary, but that just gets to the heart of it. It's like, it's just a word. It's just an identity label that you can choose to use. And if you choose to use it, that's incredible for you. And like, that's great. Like, I'm not telling anybody that it's like pointless to call yourself anything one way or the other. I'm just saying, basically I'm saying that I don't really love labels for myself anyway. Like, you can label yourself, but I just don't really feel that serviced by labels, except ones that like already exist and have like some like social capital or baggage or something attached to them, which is why like I can like utilize like the social label and category of being a woman without it being like totally definitive of my, core essence as a human being. It's just, a part of who I am and a part of how I live my life is that I, kind of associate myself with the social category of woman. So I've written a little thesis statement here at the bottom of my notes because I'm wrapping up the video now, but basically what I'm saying is that I identify as a woman, but that's just one social category, and it isn't intrinsically who I am. And I don't claim the label non-binary, but I'm already breaking down the binary by being trans. So there you have it. That's my thoughts on whether or not I'm non-binary, and what it even means to be non-binary, and just like this whole like linguistic issue surrounding the topic that we have. It's not even really a big issue, it's just kind of like a philosophical thing. I know us queer people love like waxing poetic and like philosophizing about like our identities and our experiences and stuff, so just doing a little bit of that here, don't mind me, Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Like I said, I like to post new vlogs about being transgender every Sunday, so if you like this video and you want to see more, check out more stuff on my channel. I'll put some, in the suggested videos, and please subscribe. And if you like the video and want to help it grow on the algorithm, leave a like and a comment. Alright, thank you everybody so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye!